Or I usually have it streaming on my phone too, in case we get comments. I don't usually see any comments right away.
You just love saying that. We're live. You always say that every time.
Ah,
We're
that's it.
live.
Technology. Oh, and then I love it when it starts running when on my computer while I'm in the middle of talking. All right. It's actually like when after I say no spoilers when they upgrade the system and you can hear the DJ's voices when they're not even really there. All right. Oh, and then I have a introduction written out, so I'm gonna put my glasses on for that because I'm Gen X and getting older. And welcome to the Gen X Book Club, everybody. uh,
Sure.
as usual, I shouldn't say as usual. Is welcome back, Dell, after your busy tax season, man, and
Tax
your
season.
daughter's graduation.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. We made it through. So now the next phase of college begins. So yeah. So yeah, I'm back. I appreciate you moving, continuing on without me. Probably was a better product, but that's all right.
Yeah.
But glad to be back.
Daughter's such a good kid.
Say that again. Sorry.
Daughter's such a good kid, so I'm happy for her. And
Oh,
yeah, so
thanks.
I got actually got to meet Dell and his family one time in person in real life. So imagine
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we were in Florida at the same time, same pretty much
Yeah,
the same place. So
yep,
yeah.
yep. And also Suzanne, hello.
Hi, glad to be on. We're
Right.
excited to have an author, join us so that we can have the conversation with them. So,
Yeah, exactly. This is exciting. Yeah. And if you're watching live on YouTube, you can see her, Laura Lee. And she's a very special guest, and she's an author whose diverse creative journey is as fascinating as the stories she writes. Laura Lee is the author of 21 books spanning biography, humorous reference, fiction, and children's literature. I mean, of a Metro Detroit, Laura brings a remarkably eclectic background to her writing. She holds a degree in theater and has worked as a professional mime, improvisational comic, and a radio announcer before becoming a full-time writer. These days, she divides her time between crafting new books and producing and traveling in almost all 50 states now, as on a ballet masterclass tours alongside her partner, who is the artistic director of the Russian Ballet Foundation. The San Francisco Chronicle has described Laura's work as having a dry, humorous tone and makes her a charming companion, noting her irresistible flair for wordplay. And among her many titles are Oscar's Ghost, Broke is Beautiful, Identity Theft, Don't Screw Up, and of course the book we're diving into today, Saturn's Favorite Music. Laura, we're absolutely thrilled to have you here with us, and welcome to the Gen X Book Club.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, and as Suzanne said, we're always thrilled when we actually have the author on, and I think from all our texting among ourselves, we all agree that we love this book. So,
Well, thank you.
eh,
It's thrilling to be able to talk to people who actually read the book. That's thrilling for me too.
yeah, that you know what that I've had other authors on who have on some of my other podcasts actually said the same thing. So yeah, that's yeah. It's kind of crazy. Authors haven't read the book yet, really. Yeah, so yeah, and we happily read it and loved it. So, yep. So thank you for that. I guess first before we get into the book, and uh, as we were just saying before we went on the air, this we're gonna try to keep this as spoiler free as possible because I think all Gen Xers and not even just Gen Xers, but I think everybody would love this. So, yeah, I want to give everybody the opportunity to this 5, 30, 40-year-old book. So,
Mm.
um, so your background is you have done a lot of things in your life. How do all these creative experiences like, shape your voice and humor that you bring to your books? I feel like you brought like a lot of your real life So
Yeah, I guess I mean this one is probably more autobiographical than anything I've done, although it's not exactly autobiographical, it's not me, but it certainly draws on a lot of my experiences and most of the time I'm writing about other things and topics that I'm curious about. And this one was just, I knew that there was a story that I had lived through that I could put down and share. And so, yeah, so I sat down and said, I sat down over a good decade or so saying, I'm going to write that thing and finally got to it.
This is all sounding familiar.
Yeah.
have you always had a penchant for writing, or because you've had
Well,
quite a journey? So how did you get into writing?
Well, my father was a writer, and so he always said that I was a natural born writer, and of course I rebelled against that and said, no, that's not very interesting. And so I went into theater, and actually my grandmother was an old radio actress. She was Miss Case on the Green Hornet. I don't know if you are
Oh,
Oh, wow.
familiar with old radio at all, but she was on those old WXYZ dramas. And so she kind of was, pushing me towards acting. So I ended up going to theater school, going to college for theater and getting my degree in theater and realizing that I'm not really good at theater. Um, but people would always, I'd write a script or something in the context of theater, and people would say, wow, so I finally was like, my dad was right, I guess I need to go towards writing. With a
doesn't that
little
always
side
happen?
diversion into radio, which was kind of between the two.
How did you get into radio? The same, it's like
Well,
kind of acting kind of led.
yeah, after I got my degree in theater, I didn't really want to go to New York or LA and starve and try to make it as an actor because I didn't really get cast in anything in college so much, so I figured that my chances of suddenly, becoming, a hot topic was probably pretty low. And I'm also pretty much of an introvert, so being in a studio and speaking, but not having an audience right there, it worked really well for me. So I went from theater school into broadcast school, and then from broadcast school, just I got a job in radio and did that for about 5 years.
Okay, awesome. And then like yeah, as kind of mentioned, it's like your own experiences, found your way into this book. So.
Yeah, even my grandmother kind of makes a little cameo in the book.
Uh,
Nice.
Hey, Laura, what year was this that you were like, when did you go to broadcast school?
I was in broadcast school like in 1991,
Okay.
and I was like I graduated um I think it was 91 or 92. The class was called 91, but I think I finished in 92 and then
Okay.
I got a job pretty quickly after that. And so my radio career spanned probably about 5 years, like 92 to 95 or 6 or something. And then I kind of condensed 5 years of experience into 1 year for 1.5 years for the story.
yeah, we should also mention that the story takes place start off in 1992. So yep, so that makes sense. So around the time that you were
Yeah,
there.
I mean the timing is very much, it draws a lot on when I started, and the arc was a little bit longer than it is in the book, but it's definitely that period.
But the timing is kind of pivotal because that's when the station and probably stations across the country was changing over from you all being in charge of everything manually and having to juggle a whole bunch of balls and then everything going to electronics. And that was kind of a big part of what was happening at the station in the background of the novel here. So, you couldn't really tell that same story any other year, I think. So it's kind of neat that you captured that moment.
Yeah, I felt like, the three stations where I worked kind of made this whole story about what was happening in radio at that time, which was, I started out queuing up vinyl records and splicing tape and all of that. And by the time that I finished, every station was bringing in all these different automation systems. So I um, I used two different early buggy automation systems at two different stations, and one of them actually had this bank of CD players. Now everything's in the computer, but it was this computer that controlled this bank of CD players, a whole shelf of CD players with six CD changers in them, and they would just, control them and sometimes mess up and control them badly.
Laura, Paul, and I, or Paul and Suzanne know this, but my I have a
Excuse me.
background in radio, not the path that you took, but I worked in promotions in college for a CHR station, your contemporary
Hmm.
hit radio station
Yeah.
for sorry to use the lingo, but like top 40 is what that would have been here in town, and then went to the business side for MS Communications, worked in their accounting department. So we got to oversee the stations that the company owned, but this book was a flashback for me on a lot of stuff because I took a radio class 2 years in high school, and you were talking about splicing reel-to-reel tape and things like that. And I think back on that, we did the exact same thing. We had the little white marker, and we'd mark and then splice. But I was thinking as I was reading that, I'm like, I can't believe that they trusted high schoolers with a razor blade. I don't. I'm like, what in the world were they thinking? But we did. We had a razor blade in every studio. So, and surprising,
I mean, how else would you do it,
yeah,
right?
I know. So, I mean, short of having the instructor come in and do it for you, but yeah, this was a trip back in time for me. So it was really fascinating to, and you were spot on with so much of this. Like I was remembering, my times in the studio as a student, and then working at the station, and seeing the behind the scenes stuff. So this was really a lot of fun for me to read.
It was a lot of fun to kind of go back mentally. I did write down stuff at the time that I thought was interesting or funny, and then, um, I could kind of, that first radio station where I worked, when everything was manual, I think if I went back there, I could, after about 5 minutes getting oriented, I think I could just do it all because it's just so physical, and you're doing something every 3 to 4 minutes, and that gets burned in. And when I was trying to remember the computer systems and what the screen looked like and stuff like that, I couldn't bring that back at all. But those manual processes, I can remember all of the feeds and all of the different things that you had to do.
Well, I remember back to my high school days, the 45s, we would put them on the turntable, and like you wrote about in the book, you had to turn them back, a quarter of a turn or whatever, and then hit the start button, and it would, speed up by the time it got there to the first note. But now I go back to my high school station, and I look at what the technology, and like these kids have it so easy. Like they don't have to work at all. They just hit a few buttons here and there, and it just happens. We physically had to grab the 45 off the shelf. We had to, if we couldn't find it, we'd have to scramble to look for it. I mean, there was just so much work that seemed, we didn't think about it at the time, but back then so much work. Now it's fairly easy.
And there were skills that you don't need anymore, like, when you voiced a commercial and it needed to be 30 seconds, it needed to be 30 seconds. And you needed to read that text in maybe 1 second more, like 29 to 31, but it couldn't be 32. So you had to read it at that length. And then when they brought in the computers, you just compress it,
Yeah,
and make
yeah.
it 30. So a lot of those skills, that
Yes.
you don't need them anymore. Back timing into the news feed, you're listening to something in your headphones and speaking and listening to someone's, doing the news feed and waiting for your cue. And I don't think that they do a lot of that now.
And see, I recognized a little bit of that because I didn't work in radio, but I did work in advertising where we wrote those 30-second spots and had to fit everything in, including like an automobile dealership disclaimer that people
Yeah.
would like read really, really, really fast so they could get the rest of the copy into the beginning of the and sometimes they come back to you and say, how do you expect me to read this in 30 seconds?
Do you remember the Gen X audience might remember the Moshida was his name, Ron Moshida, I think
Yeah.
it was the fast
I
talking
was just
guy
thinking of that.
who would read everything like super fast, those kind of disclaimers and stuff.
Yeah,
I
it
think that
was
was his name.
the
Yeah.
talent.
Incredible. And yeah, I mean yeah, I mean it's sad that you've had all these skills and everything, but it is, good that it's evolved and made life easier. But and one thing I think it's funny how it during this time period while that's you know transitioning over for a lot of us Gen Xers, this was a time when we were also transitioning like into adulthood, our lives were changing and everything. So I feel that it's pretty cool, that it's during this time period and this is when our lives were also changing. So it's like these parallels going on here. I don't know if that was intentional or it just happened to work out that way, but
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a coming of age story. And in some ways, I think through the older characters who are all, who have been working in radio for a while, this young character comes in, and really all of the characters in a book are usually you, right? And so I think, kind of having conversations with my older self and my younger self through these characters who had an older person's perspective, and then this young person who, reflected where I was in 1992, excited about starting this radio career that was going to be linear and, have an arrow on it and go one direction.
like, yeah, the classic example of that is like Ferris Bueller. Like we watched that as a kid, and we're like all on his side and everything. And then nowadays as adults, you kind of like see the adult's point of view, like,
Yeah.
what a punk he is. And but yeah,
Oh,
go
I was
ahead,
going to
Dan.
say, Laura, the characters in the book. I'm assuming Clara. You said it was autobiographical, based on you. Is that
Yeah, I mean,
fair to say?
I think certainly a lot of her experiences were based on my experiences. Um, she's a little more, I, I decided to let her be fully goth and just, have this kind of music just be the small town and the livestock reports and the obituaries on the radio just be so not her. I was a little bit more chill with all that stuff, but um, she was a little bit more of a fish out of water in that sense than I actually was.
And did you base together, like Ed and Seth, those based on particular people or a group of people that you just took
They're
pieces
not
of?
None of the people are really based on, I didn't take anyone from my radio, my colleagues, um, but they're just sort of they're types of people, um, that I knew in radio. And I think they represent different different approaches to the changes that are happening. So some are excited about what's happening, and some are just want things to stay the way they are. And so the different characters kind of represent those different aspects.
That's one of my favorite parts of your book is the characters. Just like Suzanne's book, plug Suzanne again. The characters, each character is so amazing, and I love character based stories as opposed to just plain plot where you don't really get to get into the characters. But I
Yeah, me
love
too.
characters and you can you just feel like you're part of it. You feel like you're like part of the family, and it feels like you could like put them in like all different kinds of situations. So I love all the interactions and the personalities, and yeah, you wrote that so well. So I just wanted to give you kudos to that because that was amazing. Yeah.
Well, I really did want it to be a community, so you feel like it's sort of this small town that you're part of, and then you see it changing. And so you're invested in it. You're
Mhm.
invested in the people and you're invested in um, whether they can continue with their jobs and all of that, and whether they'll stay together, you know.
Mhm.
It's a little bit of northern exposure in that way, referencing all of our old
Yeah,
TV shows.
yeah, that's true. And there was a radio DJ component on Northern
Yeah,
Exposure too. So
yeah, Chris in the morning.
that's true. Oh, and I don't know. See, I'm having issues with my my camera, but I have maybe can I'm wearing this
Oh,
for
Ah,
you know
oh, that's so
Oh,
cool.
which
Yeah.
if people who are watching, the graphic is the opening of the chapters. So I thought that was kind of cool. Which I
Yeah.
originally
yeah,
bought for my son does like audio and video and stuff, but I was like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna wear that shirt.
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
awesome.
sound wave.
Honorary.
Yeah. So people listening, it's kind of, is that like the sound wave, would you call that?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
type of
sound
graphic? Yeah,
wave.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And if you read the book, you see each chapter at the top of it, it has that graphics. That's so yeah, that is perfect. Yeah.
I went back and forth a lot on the cover with the guy who was designing the cover because he would send it and I would say, "Yeah, that's not the right kind of audio board." And he'd come back and I'd send him all these pictures and I'd say like, "I don't want the sliders, I want the pots." And they kind of came out smaller but I at some point you got to go like, "Yeah, that's good enough." But he had the VU meters, which is for non-radio people. There's a needle that measures how intense your sound is, essentially. And if it's too high, it goes into the red and it goes all the way to the right and it goes out over the air distorted. And so he would send the picture of the audio board with the needles like way into the red. And I keep I had to go back and say, I know this is really picky, but for anyone who actually knows radio, that'll like drive them nuts if it's like pinned into the red. So
Mhm. Yeah, you don't want to tick off those people who are going
no,
to go in and be real purists and say, no, no.
it's
Yeah.
just I think it'd be like for some people like fingernails on blackboard, they'd be looking at it all the time, going like they're running the board wrong.
Um, oh, another thing that I found fascinating about this, Clara is the main character in this, and she's basically the only female DJ. And there's some things I've discussed with guests, like my friend Crystal Bowie. She was a news reporter. I know her from, she was a local news reporter in Rhode Island, and then she moved eventually to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she was there in 2020, and we all know what happened in Minneapolis at that time. And she, wrote a memoir, More to Tell, and it's about her experience, in the local news industry, not only as a woman, but as an Asian woman in that area. And she went through hell basically with the people that she had some people backing her up, but a lot of the people in, the industry weren't really nice to her, and it,
Mm.
was treated even worse than some of the stuff that Clara went through. But is that something that you kind of seen when you were working in the industry as a woman at that
Yeah, I
time?
mean, the first two stations, I was the female voice, and I think there was a sense then that you needed one woman, you needed a female voice, and then the rest would just be men because DJs are men. And I don't think like I think looking at it from a 2025 perspective, you say like, well, that's awful. But I think at the time you kind of assimilated that and you said, oh, okay, you need the the one woman and I'm the one woman, and you didn't, someone who was going into radio now, if they said things like, you're the female voice, they would it would get their hackles up, but it was sort of you sort of didn't expect that you were going to be doing the morning show because that would be a wacky morning show guy and stuff like that. But I actually did end up doing the morning show, and it wasn't as rigid, but I do think that the default assumption is that DJs are guys, and then you have some female sidekicks and stuff like that, you know.
Hmm. I
Were
have
you
to say,
wacky?
I was a little, uh, well, getting kind of immersed in the story, a little disappointed along with some of the audience members of of the town, that you didn't get to hear more of Seth and Clara doing their bit together, because everybody found that was appealing, and I kind of liked
Enjoyed it.
their dialogue also, which strangely enough was a little different. They had chemistry, in both in person and on the air. But I don't know, it seemed a little more like theatrical when they were on the radio, and I thought that was kind of neat. So, without too many spoilers, obviously there's some chemistry going on in the book between the characters, but so we kind of
Yeah,
follow that.
yeah. She would have had to get up a lot earlier in the morning though to do more
That's
of it. So
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry. Wait, were you wacky in the morning? What was your show like?
well, it's interesting because the station that's in the book is kind of a mix of elements from different stations. So the third station where I worked um, was a country station, and it was that hyper local, like covering the school board and the high school sports and the lost pet reports and people's anniversaries and all that stuff. The first station where I worked, it was in a small town, but it was just much more of a music station. So the character of the morning show that I did was more laid back, and it was more like talking about the community and what's happening at the YMCA. And so it wasn't really the wacky morning show guys. And this was that period when like Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh were really taking off, and that kind of like shock jock thing was happening, and so the WAGE where I was kind of an antidote to that. It was very laid back. It was people would call, and we had the local guy down the street from the shop come in and talk about his shop and things like that. So, and there's something nice about it, you know. It was um it was not my community, but I was more informed about things like what was going on at the library board there than I've ever been, anywhere. I've lived longer, and not known what the the potholes were, how they were going to be filled and stuff like that.
That'll be an all day show here on Long Island. So, and another thing I love though too is that yeah, talking about 80s references, that although there were some offsite things, I love, taking place in the studio, and that just brought me back to like TV shows like well, WKRP obviously, and stuff like Cheers, Barney Miller, where's you know the, you have these characters all in this one location of work and everything, and it is still like very interesting. I,
Yeah,
I
that's sort of the three camera sitcom of literature, I guess.
right. So yeah, so I think if people enjoy those shows, they definitely enjoy this characters. He's a little bit of a complex character, I felt too. The afternoon guy.
Rad, the afternoon guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of the antagonist, but what I like about him is that he's actually, he's got his personality quirks, but he's really someone who's trying to do a good job. He's trying to put on a good show and he takes it super seriously and does all kinds of preparation and um, a lot of what he says about what makes a good show or how to do a good show, um, how he respects his audience's taste in music and things like that are actually true, but he's kind of an annoying guy, so you
Mhm.
you want to write off everything he says.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's interesting. Because he was prickly, but you're right, he was very professional and held himself to a very high standard, So, and I think if you think about workplace comedies, there usually is that guy, or even radio like KRP in Cincinnati, or news radio. There's usually somebody who's kind of like, well, I'm going to toe the line and be the professional one here. Well, everybody else is going nuts.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Seth in the morning, he can get away with things, and some of the things that he does aren't as professional as what Red does, but you're kind of on the side of Seth um,
Mhm.
instead of on the side of Red.
Yeah. Yeah. And the relationship between Seth and Ed was also pretty cool. They kept like going back and forth, but they had a long history together as well, and that was yeah, they being able to push and pull, they get along and they wouldn't. So I loved their interactions as well.
Yeah, I kind of you see this, you see Clara come in, and um, there are these relationships that you can tell have just been, that go back years, and she's just kind of having to feel it all out. What he's saying this thing, but what's behind it like 5 years back.
Teach the top people know. What kind of music did you listen to back then? Do you listen to?
I listened to I was really into 60s music in the 80s. So I liked, like Arlo Guthrie and the sort of psychedelic 60s and the Byrds and all of that. And I listened to college music. So I did actually intern at 89X in Windsor, which was a alternative station. Um, so if I had been able to go, if I'd been able to choose, I probably would have gone to an alternative station um, rather than adult contemporary. And I've actually since come to learn a lot of the stations were going, um, the adult contemporary stations were becoming country stations. So my first station was an adult contemporary station. The third station that I worked at had been an adult contemporary station and became country before I started working there. And when I was going back and sort of looking at old radio journals to kind of research what was going on then, that was that in that time there was this huge trend, like they were oversaturated with adult contemporary stations and they were all switching over to country. But I didn't know that at the time. That's just what happened where I was. But I was
Mhm.
part of a trend in that.
Sounds
The
nice.
characters seem very concerned about that, about having to with Cyrus all the time. Or
We actually, Billy Ray Cyrus, he was big in 1992.
Yeah.
Mm,
He was big, and they were playing him on the AC station, playing this Achy Breaky Heart.
Well, well, as Dell well knows, as we've been friends for years, in the '90s, there's this thing called grunge that came along, which irked
yeah.
me. And
Irked is an understatement. It it ruined music for you for a while, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, you talk about country, and then I ended up turned into country because like the rock stations they wanted to play in Nirvana, Pearl Jam, it all sounded the same to me, and it kind of my hair bands went away. So then I turned to country and at that time too.
So
So
that like life is stupid and contagious lyric isn't working for you.
uh,
I liked Beck Loser. He had that lyric in there. Go crazy with the cheese whiz. That's a good one.
it's funny now though because I don't have the music these days. kind of like lame. But so then not that long ago I was listening to so Lithium is like the 90s alternative rock station, and then I was actually felt nostalgic for it, even though I didn't like the music at the time. I'm enjoying it more now. So yeah, it's funny how
I
Kind of
was
find that,
thinking,
there's the songs that you hated, like that got totally overplayed and you couldn't stand
Mm.
them at the time. Then you hear them and it just takes you back and you go, oh, I haven't heard that song in so long. It's like that was on purpose. I didn't hear it on purpose for so long.
I felt that same thing in listening. I mean, I wasn't an adult contemporary listener at the time. I was more like you, like an alternative listener, or even like Clara. But to hear all the names and the song titles, coming up, Billy Joel and Whitney Houston and Steely Dan, and uh, it makes you very nostalgic, even if that wasn't what you constantly listened to. And now I think kind of the yacht rock trend incorporates a lot of those same artists, in that same like nice mellow vibe. And everybody thinks it's really cool now because you're imagining yourself, on a boat somewhere with the wind in your hair instead of driving to work. So maybe we
Yeah,
come
we
from a
play.
surplus generation.
Except Daryl Hall, he does not like yacht rock at all. He doesn't want to be part of it, is what he said. So,
Oh,
Really?
yeah,
Well, too bad. The yacht
that's
rock
right.
dragged
That's
him.
right. I think Hall and Oates is stuck in yacht rock. They have no choice.
is that when they split up?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Who
they didn't
knows?
call it that, and they didn't call the way Clara dressed and stuff goth at that time.
Right.
That's
That's
we call it
true.
that now, but
Right. I note that a lot too when I talk to my kids about this stuff. Because, I was more of a new wave girl, but we never said goth. They never said, I mean, it was
no,
what you call now goth for sure. But we would call it like hardcore, or, it was more of
yeah,
a punk thing.
89X, the alternative station, they called it New Rock. That was the label for it, New Rock.
Okay.
Yeah, that was all the Love and Rockets and Bauhaus and you know
Our
Lithium,
yeah, our
Nirvana.
our station here, the alternative station was X 103. So X was, I think, a big thing for radio stations if
Yeah,
they
if it
were
had an
that format.
X.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was so inspired by this book. I was when I was driving somewhere to an appointment. It was a long drive. I actually, for the first time in years, I actually put on a whole radio station I used to listen to, 94
Hmm.
HJY, because I always listen to either have like because I have my Bluetooth on, I'll listen to Spotify like podcasts or I'll listen to XM. So I actually listen to the radio show. It was the home 94 HJY, the home of rock and roll, and it still is. But the whole time I was driving, I don't think there was anything um, that they got in past 1996. Everything was all like 90, it was still all the music I was listening to back then. So either there aren't any new mainstream rock bands, or they haven't received
Well,
any music.
Right.
But
they want to catch you with that recognition when you're, turning the dial. And if it's something that's you haven't heard, it's harder to make you stop, on the dial on that station.
oh, that's true. That's like if you go to a concert and a band's playing, and then they go, "We have this new song here," and everybody goes up,
Yeah.
goes to the bathroom, and
Yeah. No, it was.
Because we switch our media a lot more than we used to. And so you could play a lot of stuff that people hadn't heard, a lot more stuff that people hadn't
Mm,
heard. I mean, it was always formatted to try to get people to tune in and say, "Oh, that's the sound I like. I know that song. I like that song, so I'm going to like the next three songs." And you, I think our brains are kind of wired for scrolling and looking for the next thing, and it's hard to have patience sometimes with the radio because they play a song and then they play something that you don't know or don't like, and that sort of habit of sitting and waiting through it to see what's next. I don't think we have that as much as we did back then.
Yeah, just like
Yeah,
TV, there's too many options now, and everything's all compartmentalized. And when we were growing up, you'd have like John Denver on, and then AC/DC. And then it'd be a mix of all different kinds of music back then, and now it's like all.
yeah, I miss things being a little more randomly curated or curated by a single human being or even by the artist when you put together an album and their
Yeah,
songs are in a certain order and there's images on the cover. It's a whole different world where it's like, kind of the wild, wild west out there where people are just, making their own playlists from all this stuff that's out there and nobody's really there was a lot more universal kind of uh, uh, way to experience music where people all over the area are listening to what the different programmers are playing. And I think it was so much easier to kind of cultivate tastes for a certain kind of music. I feel like today everything is kind of regurgitated and it's just maybe I don't want to go down that path, but
Well,
but I
it's hard to know
yeah,
because
maybe I don't want to go down that. But
people's media is so individualized. It's hard to know if you were an 80s kid, you heard the Eurythmics' Sweet Dreams like everybody else, Um, but if you're listening to Spotify now and YouTube and everything else and you're making your favorites and maybe your group of friends, have a collective music experience, but maybe it's not, the whole generation sharing it. I don't know. I don't know. I guess people do find ways to connect with their peer
yeah,
peer
the tribe.
cohort, right?
Well, I feel like with radio back when we were younger, there were songs that I probably would not even know
Mhm.
today had I not been listening to that. I mean, I remember the our top 40 station, they would get a single that maybe wasn't as popular as, a Madonna song or George Michael or whatever. And then they would just, play it every 3 hours or something like that. And after a while, you're like, this song's pretty good. Whereas I probably wouldn't have even sought it out myself if it was today. So I just feel like sometimes we miss out on things that we don't know we're missing out on because um, it's just we just have too many choices.
And in Detroit, because I grew up in Detroit, and my first radio work was in the Detroit area in Michigan. We had all the Canadian stations. In fact, my first internship was in Canada in Windsor at 89X, and so they had they called it Maple Leaf laws. They had a certain amount of Canadian content they had to play. So you would hear in Detroit different music that you might not hear in Ohio, Indiana, because you had all that Canadian music coming over the border. And I think that's the same with cities on the Mexican border and cities, that could pick up regional stations. There'd just be a different. I'm sort of saying the opposite of what I was saying a few minutes ago, but it's it's true. You'd get a different communal experience based on where you lived.
Yeah, I'm not really into the Spotify. I know that's the direction everybody's going, but I still listen to I listen to Sirius XM, and then I'll tune into our local stations every once in a while, just because I miss them. I forget about them sometimes. Whereas that was all that was there when we were growing up, and MTV, but but that's where we got our music, and now it's just so many different places. But
Yeah, and the same thing with albums. Like it's so easy to get music between YouTube and Spotify, but we'd buy an album, probably would buy it for like one or two songs. So then you you spend money on it, so then you force yourself to listen to the whole album since you spent the money on it. And the more you listen to it, the more you like some of the songs on there that you wouldn't have
Yeah.
given the time of
Find
day
little
before.
gems and stuff, and sometimes fall in love with a
Hmm.
B-side or something
I pro
along those lines.
I probably would be a millionaire right now had I not have bought all those CDs and albums over the years. I could just paid $15 a month and had everything I wanted. So yeah, came about 30 years too late for me, but yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Laura, I was just going to mention, so reading this book and your experience in a station, as I started, it reminded me like I really wish, I wanted to go into radio. That's what I wanted to do, and it really got me excited, almost regretting that I didn't take that path. And then as the book continued, it reminded me of all the reasons I didn't get into radio, and I was glad that I didn't. And it sounds like you had a similar experience, and I know several people, former coworkers that had a similar experience too, and it kind of makes me sad because it's such an exciting. I mean, you see Claire's excitement for getting into the field, and that's what she wants to do, and she's got all these visions of where she wants to go with her career, and then it's nothing like that. So I just sort of feel like maybe that's an experience, unless you really are a big name, that a lot of people have had.
Yeah, I think when even when I was you know in radio, they often had a problem of having the DJ sound very young because it was kind of a young person's career because people would burn out on it or they would say, well, this is too hard, and they would go on to something else. But it's a lot of fun for anybody who loves music,
Yeah.
and just being able to share the music and I don't know, queuing it up was fun, keeping that all those wheels in motion was fun. And yeah, for me, I think it was there were still a lot of wheels to keep in motion with automation, but just the pace of it was a lot more challenging, and I think I enjoyed the challenge of it in those vinyl days.
Well, I always thought it was so cool when I was doing that internship in college. You'd be in the studio and they'd be taking live calls from listeners and taking requests, even though they really didn't take requests. They took the requests. But but yeah, I mean, and I think that automation, the voice tracking, all of that, a lot of that is lost now. Um, I mean, I was that I forget the character's name, but the guy who won the contest and constantly, and he'd come. Everybody knew his name. I was that guy. I called in one time and they're like, "Hey, Dell, have you won in the last 30 days?" That was the question that they asked me that went over the air. So yeah, I was that guy. But I miss that. It was just I think that's the interaction with the listener, the excitement. You're keeping him hooked to win that T-shirt or that album or those concert tickets or whatever. And you just now it's all they're giving away concert tickets, but you gotta enter online or whatever. I don't know how radio ever gets back to that, if that's even something that is missed right now, or is it just me? I don't know, but it just seems like it's changed so much away from the
Yeah,
listener.
you really did know, there were listeners and you did know them, there was a woman who used to um, call up and she did horoscopes and she would do my charts and she'd be listening to what I said on the radio and then she'd call up and say, well, this is because, Pluto is in your such and such. And, so you had real connections to a lot of people who were invested in what you're doing, and that was fun.
Um, had, did you ever meet any celebrities, any singers or anything while you were?
Before I became a DJ in my own right was when I met them all. So when I was an intern, it was a big, major market station, and so they'd all come in. So Tom Cochran came in and played. Not Lunatic for Life is a Highway. He came in and
Live Beside
played
Highway.
Life is a
Hmm.
Highway and that the songs from that album in the studio. Um,
He's Canadian too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and Shadowy Men from a Shadowy Planet. Do you know them? They were
Oh,
Canadians. They came into the station too. Um, what's that song? Tennessee. It was this sort of um,
Arrested Development.
Arrested Development.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
came in. There were like 250 members of that band, and they squeezed into the studio.
There were, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was before, and we would get you'd get concert tickets and stuff like that. They were always sponsoring shows, and they'd say, "Oh, you want tickets to this show or that show?" So yeah, the internship was more exciting. You kind of fall off a cliff when you go from the internship where you're going with the DJ to Club X and um, hanging out with all the folks and doing the contest and people coming up, and then you go and you're just sitting in a little room in a little town talking to nobody. And
yeah. And did you do any remotes? You have like a couple of remotes in this in the book.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, we did. I a lot of remotes, and like it says in the book, they were usually for things that it was always products that had enough money to pay for a remote, which meant that they were usually things that people weren't coming in and like impulse buying. So you'd be saying, "Yeah, we're here at the furniture store. We've got a great sale on beds, and here are the balloons." And but people would come out and you know enter your contest, look at the beds and the cars and stuff like that. A lot of cars, and yeah, you get out and meet the people.
Um, I also like how you mentioned all the different songs and everything that they were playing on the air. And I have to tell you something. I did this for Suzanne's book.
Make a list.
Yep. Her,
Not my playlist.
for, for Suzanne's book, Once in a Lifetime, all her chapters begin with the her chapters are named with songs. So I created a playlist with all the songs that she listed, and I did the same thing for you.
Oh wow.
I created a Spotify playlist, Saturn's favorite music. Oh, I should call it Saturn's favorite playlist.
There you go. Sounds good.
So yeah, I
I
didn't think of it at first, but then as I kept going, I was like, oh, I got to create a playlist for this. So I'll share it with you. I created a playlist of all the songs that you
I am so excited to hear Michael Bolton. I can't tell you. That's gonna be yeah,
mentioned.
Put
American
some Barry
Pie.
Manilow in there and
yeah.
Air
There
Supply.
there were some rather obscure hits that were you mentioned, and I'll
Mhm.
have to look at the playlist to be reminded. But there were, oh yeah, I forgot all about that song. That was, a top 30 hit or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to put in some of the ones that you don't hear all the time, and I did have air checks and tapes of some of my shows, and I could listen, and so I would mention these songs, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, uh, John Cicada, okay," you know. I had to rickroll the reader though. I had to.
There you go. Got it in
I
there.
did.
yeah.
Perfect.
That's adorable.
Yeah, I don't know. We could start wrapping up. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to ask Laura?
Hmm. Well, maybe just wanted to mention I thought it was interesting that to solve a few of the problems in the in the book, Clara like changes the color of her hair,
Yes.
which I guess I've read that women do that. Like maybe like 40% of women, if they go through a breakup, will change the color of their hair. So, when she was feeling insecure about her professionalism, she became a Barbie blonde. But then by the by as she progressed through the book, she decided to make an additional change and she was kind of somewhere in between the goth and the Barbie. So I like that was reflected. The her evolution was reflected in how she presented herself, and especially in the hairdo. Even though she was on, she's on radio. We didn't, nobody else got to see it, but
Mhm.
Well, I hope that I hope that she's would now be kind of a, cool, uh, 50-year-old.
Okay, I believe it.
She should probably still be coloring her hair because, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we know. Um, all right, so yeah, would you like to I highly recommend everybody read this book. So would you like to tell everybody, Laura, where they can find you? Get the book?
Well, it's in the, the usual suspects, the online places. And also lauraleeauthor.com is my webpage, and you can read some of the stuff about the book there. Um, and yeah, I would love to say anywhere books are sold, but that's not actually true. But if you go into anywhere that books are sold and ask them, they can order it.
Oh, there you go. Yep. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And yeah, and the yes, I'll put links in the show notes to your website because I did find another Laura Lee and she has had some
Yeah,
steamy books that
there's a Laura Lee who writes books about coping with the loss of your pet. And I discovered that when people started sending me emails telling me that their dog had died, and I'm thinking, why are people telling me that? And then, I finally
It's like
figured it out.
a Casey Kasem long distance dedication is what it
Right.
was. So yeah,
Long distance dedication.
yeah. Did all of you ever hear the one about the dog dying, the clip that was going around? Like in the when the internet began and everybody was sharing things, there's a Casey Kasem clip where he segues out of a song into something dog dying. I'll send it to you, but it's hilarious. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah, he goes
obviously
off, man.
yeah, okay, good. You know what I'm talking about. I thought I used a
Yeah,
reference that nobody knew what I was talking about, but yeah, that's what I was.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
sorry to hijack that, Laura. Just keep going. Sorry. That's all right.
Well, I'm not the Lord. I don't know anything. I sympathize if you lost your pet, but I can't offer any wisdom.
Not an expert in, pet psychological sympathy
No.
programs, yeah,
And
support. But
I'm also not psychic. There's a Laura Lee who's a psychic, and one of my early books, I got booked on a radio show to promote it, and I was, they had already introduced me and everything when they realized that they thought they were booking a psychic, and it was just somebody who had a book out, and they didn't know what to do. So I'm not psychic.
maybe you
I
should have just
don't
ran with it anyway and made some
Yeah,
things up.
the same thing.
I don't know about your pets, but I did write Saturn's favorite music to bring it back to this book.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you happen to have anything else coming on the horizon that people can look forward to? Or,
Well, hopefully, right now I'm on my ballet masterclass tour with my partner, so I'm focused on that. But when I get back in September, um, I'll start thinking about the next book.
yeah, that's okay. You have quite the catalog of books, and I really want to dig into them
Yeah.
because you're an outstanding writer, and all those books look awesome. All the different types. We talk about different genres of music, but you have like all different genres of books, and it's incredible, and every one of them look awesome. So yeah, we can't wait to like start digging into those as well.
Well,
So,
thank you.
all right,
Okay.
so Dell, do you want to tell people how they can reach you? Do you happen to be on the air right now as we're speaking? Like
No, I am not.
Clara.
No, 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 no. I am not on the air, and we're actually off for a bit because of the summer break. So we'll be back on the air in August. So I'll plug the radio show next month, assuming our station isn't sold between now and then. So that's a
Change the
possibility.
format.
Change the format to country. So my worst fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Laura, it's an 80s show that I do on the weekends. So for my old high school station. So it's not like I'm making less than you were probably making at your gig. But yeah. So yeah, I'll plug that next month so that when we return in August, people can tune in.
All right, Susie, you want to tell people how they can reach you?
Yeah, sure. SuzanneMataboni.com or onceinaLifetimeNovel.com. For Once in a Lifetime is a coming of age also that takes place in 1985 with a lot of musical references more on the alternative side. So that's fun. And I have a few things coming out, short story collection, and I'm in a poetry anthology that's kind of inspired by Stevie Nicks lyrics. So it's a kind of neat thing coming out in the spring. So I'll keep everybody posted on that on Facebook or Twitter, and you can find the novel on Amazon and Kindle and that kind of stuff. So
Awesome. All right. And then, of course, you can find this GenX Journeys on Instagram and Facebook. And I should also mention that we decided on the book for July will be Films of Endearment by Michael Koreski. And that looks like a really fun book. Michael and his mom, they cover one movie for each year throughout the 80s. So yeah, it looks like a really interesting book. So I'll put it in the show notes and I'll be promoting that as well. And yep, so yeah, we gotta keep this going. It's a lot of fun. And I want to thank you so much for Laura for joining us. It's not
yeah, thank
too
you.
often we actually have the author on, so we really appreciate this so much, giving us your time and with this awesome work as well. So thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading it.
We loved it.
It was
Yeah, we
fun.
loved it. And everybody will love it. So yeah, go out there and get it. Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you next month. Bye.